When a Florida judge hit Pam Bondi with a $50,000 fine to shut her up, no one expected her next move, but within seconds of entering that courtroom, she flipped the entire situation and left everyone stunned. It wasn't the kind of case Pam Bondi ever imagined being pulled into, not after stepping away from the legal spotlight years ago, not after everything she'd already seen, but there she was standing in courtroom 4B of the Hillsborough County Courthouse in Tampa, Florida, staring down a $50,000 contempt fine. With her name on it, the courtroom was quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was rigid, tense. You could feel it in the way no one made eye contact, not the bailiff, not the stenographer, not even the local journalist scribbling notes by the wall. Pam stood up slowly when her name was called, adjusting the navy blazer she'd worn 100 times before. The judge didn't waste time. "This court finds you in contempt for knowingly violating a direct gag order," Judge Corbin said flatly. His tone wasn't angry, it was tired, rehearsed. "You are hereby fined $50,000 to be paid in full within 30 days. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just looked at him dead in the eye, then quietly said, "Understood." But what really made people sit up wasn't what the judge said, it was what Pam did next. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder, not thick, not flashy, just a worn manila file marked with 3 red tabs. She held it in her hand without opening it, calmly placing it on the table in front of her. The air shifted because everyone in that room knew what that file might contain. They'd all heard the rumors how Pam had made some serious accusations in a recent radio interview, claims that a sitting judge had silenced 2 whistleblowers in a corporate liability case, that documents had been buried, that backroom deals had influenced rulings. It wasn't just legal drama. If true, it was career-ending, maybe worse. She hadn't named names on the air, but she had hinted strongly enough for the judge to feel the sting, enough for him to hit back, and now here she was with a folder that could change everything. Judge Corbin raised an eyebrow. "Miss Bondi, do you have something you wish to submit to the court?" "I do," she said plainly, "but only if you are prepared to hear the full context." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. In for the first time, the judge hesitated. He glanced at the clerk, then at Pam, then back at the file. "You may proceed," he said. She opened the folder with care, as if each page inside was something sacred. The first sheet was an email dated 6 months earlier, a conversation between a junior clerk and a private attorney, flagged with 3 simple words: "Client request denied." The content was dry until you read between the lines. The next document, a deposition from a court interpreter, one who'd been quietly dismissed after raising questions about sealed testimony that had vanished from record. And finally, a notarized affidavit, signed, dated, sworn under penalty of perjury, a former assistant to Judge Corbin, claiming they'd been instructed to withhold a file from evidence in a major civil lawsuit involving a local hospital. Pam laid each item down one by one on the table in front of her. "I never broke the gag order," she said, "because I never discussed the case directly, but I did speak about what I saw and what I still see happening behind closed doors. The public has a right to know when the law is being twisted to serve power." The courtroom was dead quiet. You could hear the second hand on the wall clock tick. Judge Corbin didn't say a word. He just leaned back in his chair, face unreadable, and just like that, everything changed. But before we get to what Pam revealed and how deep the story goes, there's something you need to understand about the moment that led her here. 6 months earlier, no one was threatening Pam Bondi with fines. She was sipping coffee on her back porch in Clearwater Beach, watching the sun rise over the water. Semi-retired, consulting, part-time, speaking here and there. She'd stepped away from the fight, at least that was the plan. Then she got the first call. It was from Leah Holcomb, a friend from her early days in the state attorney's office. They hadn't talked in over a year, maybe more, but the tone in Leah's voice wasn't casual. "Pam, I need you to listen to something," Leah had said. What she sent wasn't long, a voicemail just under a minute. It was muffled, recorded from another phone, but you could make out 2 voices arguing over a sealed court document. One of the voices clearly belonged to a man, the other was scared. "I told you it's not in the file anymore." He pulled it. The woman said, "Then you didn't hear it from me." The man replied. Pam replayed it 3 times. She called Leah back. "Where'd this come from?" "I can't tell you. You don't want to know." Pam didn't sleep that night. The next day she drove 2 hours inland to Winter Haven to meet Leah in person. They sat in Leah's kitchen with the blinds drawn and phones turned off. That's when Leah handed her the file, a mix of printouts and hand-scribbled notes, some of it barely legible. At the top was the name of the plaintiff, Jonas McNeil, a nurse who had sued a hospital over severe patient negligence. The case had been settled quietly last year. But according to Leah, the original complaint had included allegations against 2 senior administrators that were later erased from the record. "It's like they wiped it clean," Leah said. "The complaint we have now isn't the one he filed." Pam leaned back in her chair, staring at the paperwork. "And who presided?" Leah hesitated. "Corbin." That name hit different back when Pam was still working cases. Judge Corbin had a reputation for being sharp, decisive, but hard to read. No nonsense. He also had connections, deep ones, private donors, golf weekends with corporate attorneys, closed-door meetings. No one questioned Pam. Didn't speak for a while. When she did, it was just 2 words: "I'm digging." But she wasn't naive. She'd been warned before. A week after she made her first public comment on a small local radio show, she got a call from an old mentor, someone she trusted. "Pam, I know what you're doing," he said, voice low, "but this won't go the way you think. Corbin doesn't lose, he plays long, and if you keep talking, it won't just be your career. They come after I'm not working cases, she replied. He sighed. They don't care. She hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Pam wasn't impulsive. She didn't like chaos. Her career had been built on discipline, on knowing when to fight and when to walk away, but this felt different. There was too much rot under the surface and people were getting hurt because no one had the guts to speak up, so she kept digging. She found a former court assistant, Denise Kramer, who'd worked in Judge Corbin's office during the McNeil case. It took 3 meetings and a lot of coaxing, but eventually Denise opened up. He told me to refile the transcript without the third deposition. Denise said it was irrelevant, but it wasn't. What was in it? Pam asked. Denise hesitated, then whispered that the patient's death could have been prevented and that the hospital knew that. Was the moment Pam stopped asking for permission. She knew she was crossing a line, but if she stayed quiet she'd be just another person looking the other way, so she said what she said. And within 72 hours she was standing in a courtroom being fined for contempt. But what Pam didn't expect was how quickly the machine would move to silence her, and just how far some people were willing to go to make her disappear from the narrative. The deeper Pam went, the more twisted it became. Every file she opened, every voice she tracked down seemed to point towards something bigger, not just a botched case or a shady judge, but a pattern, a structure, one that had been propped up for years. The McNeil case wasn't isolated. Pam found 3 others, 2 civil, 1 criminal, where documents had been misplaced, sealed prematurely, or reworded before final entry, and in every one of them Judge Corbin had sat on the bench. But it wasn't just him. The attorneys involved, same firms, the clerks, quiet transfers, the settlements, always sealed, the numbers always just enough to keep people quiet. It was like a script and everyone played their part. Pam reached out to Jonas McNeil himself. He was hesitant, even nervous, but agreed to meet her in the back room of a small diner in Bradenton. He looked older than his 38 years, like the lawsuit had drained something out of him. They told me I should be grateful for what I got, Jonas said, stirring his coffee. Said it was the best I could hope for. Then they made me sign all that paperwork, confidentiality, no interviews, no statements. I figured, all right, maybe this is just how it works. Pam leaned forward. But you had more to say. He nodded slowly. The patient's name was Elijah, 15 years old. He had a seizure in the ER. They left him alone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I told them he needed constant observation. They ignored me, and when he died they scrubbed the logs. Pam felt it in her gut. And you put that in the complaint? Yeah, Jonas whispered, and then it vanished. He gave her a copy of his original filing, one he wasn't supposed to keep. The difference between it and the official version was chilling. Pages had been restructured, names omitted, entire segments gone. But that wasn't even the worst part. Back at her house, Pam pored through the files and noticed something strange. An internal memo dated the day before Jonas's original filing referenced a settlement path and early suppression strategy. It was unsigned but clearly authored by someone close to the court. The language was corporate, sterile, detached, but its meaning was sharp. They planned to bury this before it ever hit a courtroom, she murmured. It was then that she realized Judge Corbin wasn't just biased. He was part of something engineered to control outcomes, to protect institutions, to erase liability. With a pen and a quiet nod. And he wasn't working alone. Denise, the former court assistant, confirmed it when they met again. He's got 2 people feeding him case strategies before they hit his docket, she said. One works for a private legal consultant in Tallahassee, the other is still on staff. Pam blinked. Still in the courthouse? Denise nodded. Still in his ear. It was like something from a movie, but no one was acting. These were real people, real decisions, real harm. And the deeper Pam looked, the more she saw how far-reaching the connections were. The fine wasn't about contempt, it was about intimidation, a warning shot, a public slap to remind her who held the reins. But they'd miscalculated. Pam didn't scare easily, and she wasn't alone. She got calls, quiet ones, from others who had worked around Corbin, a paralegal who'd been pushed out after raising questions about missing exhibits, a clerk who remembered the judge signing orders before the hearings even started, a retired bailiff who said he'd once seen Corbin step into a conference room with hospital lawyers during a recess. A room no judge was supposed to be in. Each person added another piece to the puzzle, but none of them were willing to go public because they'd seen what happened to people who did. Word got around fast, not the full story, just enough of it, enough for doors to start closing. Pam started noticing the shift about a week after she'd spoken with Jonas McNeil. Her inbox, which was usually flooded with legal invites, suddenly went quiet. A scheduled speaking engagement at a law school in St. Petersburg got postponed. Then a legal panel she was set to moderate quietly removed her name from the flyers. At first she tried to brush it off. Maybe it was timing, maybe people were just busy. But when her longtime accountant, a man she trusted for years, called and suggested she take a step back from anything public, she knew it wasn't coincidence. It was a message. You're making people nervous, Pam showed, he said, trying to keep his tone even. You're shaking trees. Nobody wants shaken. I'm not in this to comfort them, she replied. Yeah. Well, they have long memories and longer reach. She hung up, but the words stuck. The next day, a journalist from a mid-sized paper in Gainesville reached out asking for a comment on her recent public allegations. He said someone from the courthouse had tipped him off, suggesting Pam was on a personal crusade for relevance, that she was bitter, that she had an axe to grind. They say you're trying to dig up old ghosts that don't exist, the journalist said. Pam didn't argue. She just asked him one question: did they mention the McNeil case? Silence. They didn't, did they? She said no. He admitted just vague stuff, nothing specific. Pam sighed. Then maybe ask yourself why that call never made it to print. Then came the fine. She wasn't surprised when the contempt hearing was rushed. The court clerk had barely given her 2 days notice, no specifics on what rules she'd allegedly violated, just that her remarks interfered with the integrity of an ongoing matter. Pam showed up anyway. She didn't bring a lawyer, just herself, a legal pad, and a calmness that made some people in the courtroom shift in their chairs. Judge Corbin didn't even look at her when he read the fine aloud. This is not a platform for personal crusades, Miss Bondi, he said. This is a courtroom. There are rules. I know the rules, Pam replied. I followed them for 2 decades. I also know when they're being twisted. He didn't respond, just moved on. Pam paid attention to the faces in the room. The court reporter kept her eyes down. The bailiff, usually warm, stood stiff and quiet, and in the back row someone she didn't recognize. A man in a gray suit, no notes, no briefcase, watched every move she made. Afterward, when she tried to speak to one of the attorneys who had helped with the McNeil case, she was brushed off. Sorry, Pam, can't get involved, the man said, glancing around nervously. I've got a family to feed. I'm not asking you to go on record. Doesn't matter, he muttered. People talk. She walked away feeling something cold settle in. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. This wasn't about protecting the court's image. This was about preserving power. And they were willing to burn anyone who stepped out of line. That night back at home, she poured herself a glass of wine and looked at the manila folder again, the same one she'd later bring to court. Inside it now were 3 new statements, all from people who had something to lose if they spoke. None of them wanted their names on record, but they trusted her. One of them wrote, if anyone can make this stick, it's you. Just be careful they don't play fair. Pam sat with that for a long time. She wasn't sure what the next move would be, but she knew it had to be public, loud, documented. She'd already been punished for saying too much. The only way forward now was to say even more, but to do that Pam had to go back into the courtroom, back in front of the judge who tried to silence her and lay it all on the line. It was raining the morning Pam returned to court. The sky was heavy, the streets slick with puddles, and traffic moved slow on I-275 heading into downtown Tampa. She drove alone, no driver, no assistant, just a small leather case on the passenger seat beside her, the same one she used to carry into murder trials 20 years earlier. Inside were 2 things: the manila folder, now updated with fresh declarations and timelines, and a printed motion she'd written herself at 2:30 in the morning. It was short, 3 pages, a formal response to the contempt fine and a counter motion requesting judicial review of the conduct behind the McNeil case. She parked on the far end of the courthouse lot, choosing not to use the private entrance. Let them see her. The same security guard from last time waved her through without a word, no smile, no warmth, but that didn't matter anymore. Pam wasn't here to be liked. Courtroom 4B was half full, a few reporters, 1 assistant state attorney sitting near the front. Even Judge Corbin's wife, Frances, always poised, never expressive, was in the second row. Pam didn't make eye contact with anyone. She walked in, set her file on the table, and waited. It didn't take long. Judge Corbin entered promptly at 10 a.m. This hearing will address Miss Bondi's formal response to the previously issued fine, he began. You may proceed. Pam stood. No notes, no laptop, just the folder. Your Honor, she said, I'm not here to dispute your authority or the court's right to impose order, but I am here to challenge the narrative being used to punish me for speaking the truth. She held up the folder. What I've submitted today includes a sworn affidavit from Denise Kramer, your former court assistant, alleging improper instruction to withhold deposition transcripts. I've also included documentation showing inconsistencies between the initial complaint filed by Jonas McNeil and the version entered into official record. Corbin's expression didn't change, but a few people in the gallery sat up straighter. Pam continued, in addition, I've provided a notarized statement from a retired bailiff who witnessed ex-parte contact between you and outside counsel during recesses in civil proceedings. She paused. These are not opinions, they're facts, recorded, reviewed, and sworn. Judge Corbin interlaced his fingers and leaned back slightly. Miss Bondi, what exactly is your motion here? Pam took a breath. I'm requesting an immediate review of the McNeil case by an independent judicial panel, and I'm asking for a stay on my contempt fine until that review is complete. There was a murmur in the gallery, quiet but sharp. Judge Corbin's face stayed neutral, but the tension in the room was starting to bend. Do you have legal representations? He asked. No, Pam replied. I'm representing myself, fully prepared to file in federal court if this motion is denied. The threat was real, and he knew it. A long silence followed, the kind that makes even the most seasoned observers check their posture. Corbin finally turned to the clerk. File the motion, I'll review it and issue a written response within 7 business days. Pam nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. She returned to her seat but didn't relax. She knew this wasn't a win, it was a stall, a delay tactic. They were hoping she'd blink, but she wasn't here to blink. As court adjourned, she gathered her things slowly. One of the junior reporters from the back row rushed over. Miss Bondi, was that a sworn statement from someone inside the judge's chambers? Pam didn't answer right away. She zipped her case, looked the young woman in the eye, and said it was real. That's all I'll say for now. The reporter scribbled furiously, then turned and ran out as the room emptied. Pam stepped outside into the drizzle. She didn't feel triumphant, she didn't feel relieved, but she felt firm-rooted. The system wasn't used to people standing their ground like this, especially not someone who used to be part of it. But standing firm was just the beginning, because what came next would test everything Pam believed about justice, loyalty, and whether the truth really stood a chance against power. The days that followed were slow but not quiet. Pam didn't wait around for the judge's written response. Instead, she went on the offensive. She held her first press interview just 2 days after the hearing, sitting across from a skeptical but intrigued reporter from the Tampa Bay Times. The interview was cautious at first, circling around facts she could legally speak on. But when the reporter asked, "Are you afraid of retaliation?" Pam didn't hesitate. "No, I've already been punished. The only thing they can do now is prove me right or prove me wrong." The quote made the front page, and with it came a shift. A former staffer from the clerk's office emailed her anonymously. They'd read the article and recognize the name in her motion filing: Denise Kramer. "If she's finally talking," the email read, "then maybe it's safe for the rest of us." Attached was a scanned court memo with unexplained redactions. And the initials are C. Roger Corbin. Pam read it 3 times, then she printed it and added it to the growing pile on her kitchen table. Calls kept coming. A former legal intern who'd been dismissed after flagging a duplicate file entry. A court stenographer who remembered having her transcript sent back for edits despite nothing being wrong with it. None of these stories had been shared publicly, but now Pam was collecting them like puzzle pieces, and still no word from the court. 7 business days passed. Then 8, then 10. On the 11th day, Pam received the written response by courier. Motion for review denied, fine upheld. There was no explanation, no footnotes, just one signature at the bottom: Roger C. Corbin. Pam sat on the edge of her sofa reading the single sentence again and again, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it too well. They weren't backing down, so neither would she. That evening she held a press conference outside the courthouse. The turnout wasn't massive, maybe 30 people, but that was enough. Enough to say what needed to be said. "I submitted sworn affidavits, deposition inconsistencies, and documented patterns of case interference. None of it was addressed in the denial," she said calmly. "This is not about revenge. It's not even about one judge. It's about whether our courts answer to truth or to themselves." She held up the courier response, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her folder. "I will be appealing this decision in federal court, and if anyone else out there has been pressured to stay silent, now's your chance to speak." She didn't smile, she didn't raise her voice, but the tone hit deep. People felt it. That night a video clip of her statement started circulating online. Nothing viral, nothing explosive, but enough to get attention from outside Florida. By morning, 3 national legal blogs had picked up the story. A retired judge from California tweeted, "If even half of what she's alleging is true, this demands review urgently." A podcast host from Austin asked for an interview. Suddenly Pam wasn't just an isolated voice in Tampa. She was a spark in Judge Corbin. He finally blinked. 2 days later, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission quietly announced that they would be conducting an internal review of Judge Corbin's recent case history. No details, no timeline, just a formal acknowledgement that something needed a second look. Pam read the statement 3 times, this time not because she had doubts, but because the truth had finally made it loud enough to echo through the walls that tried to keep it out. She didn't pop champagne, didn't send emails. She just texted Denise. They blinked. "We keep going." But even with the door finally cracking open, Pam knew one thing: the fight for accountability was far from over. The headlines didn't last. Within 2 weeks the media had shifted back to politics, weather events, and celebrity scandal. That's just how news cycles work. But something had changed, and not just for Pam. She was back in Clearwater, walking the beach in the early morning light, when she got a call from Leah Holcomb, the same friend who'd handed her the first file. They hadn't spoken in a few days. "You saw the update?" Leah asked. "I did." Pam said. "They're assigning a panel from outside the state." Pam paused, toes sinking slightly into the wet sand. "Good, that's what it should have been from the start." There was a moment of silence, then Leah said, "I don't know how you kept pushing. Most people would have just taken the fine and disappeared." Pam looked out at the water, her voice steady. "Because if I let it go, that would have meant I agreed with it. I couldn't do that, not and live with myself." It wasn't about pride, it wasn't about ego, it was about what happens when someone in the system, someone who knows better, chooses silence for the sake of comfort. That kind of silence spreads, it makes everything worse, and that was the lesson Pam had come to understand. Maybe too late, maybe right on time. She'd always believed in the law and its power, its structure, but this reminded her that power, when left unchecked, protects itself. What saved her wasn't the law, it was the people who were tired of being quiet. Denise, Jonas, Leah, the clerk who sent the anonymous email, the bailiff, the paralegal, each of them had something to lose. Each of them chose to speak anyway, and because of that Pam hadn't stood alone. There was no parade, no victory lap, no resignation from Judge Corbin, at least not yet. But the Florida JQC's investigation was real. The paper trail had grown, and now eyes were watching. Not everyone maybe, but enough. Pam resumed her consulting work. No lawsuits, no cameras, just a quiet return to the rhythm she'd missed. Some mornings she still checked the court's public docket just to see what had been filed. Old habits. Then one afternoon an envelope arrived, no return address, just her name written in tight cursive. Inside was a note: "I was one of the jurors in the McNeil case. We never saw the real file. I remember wondering why. Thank you for not letting it slide." No signature, just that. Pam folded the note and placed it next to her folder. Some battles don't end with applause, they end with a quiet moment of clarity, of knowing you didn't let fear win. Before all this, she once told a young law student, your reputation won't be built on how many cases you win, it'll be built on how many truths you don't run from. Now she believed that more than ever, because it wasn't just about fighting corruption, it was about reminding people that one voice backed by truth still matters, even when the room doesn't want to hear it, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Pam Bondi had been told to sit down, stay quiet, and accept the fine. Instead, she stood up and held the system to its own rules. And while the consequences were real, so was the impact. Let this be a reminder: when you're told to back down for speaking truth, ask yourself what happens if you don't. If this story moved you or made you think twice about silence in the face of power, subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories that challenge, comfort, and shine light where others won't.